Let's talk again about the folly of the progressives. Oh, that's not the song I wanted to play. So I went to City Hall recently to speak about the crazy situation that I'm dealing with my wonderful tenant, who is a Republican meme, right? We try to advocate, for improvements in housing policy. We try to address the housing crisis. The right-wing Republicans, they talk about the welfare queen and, handouts and incentives to work. I basically have their mascot living in my house. Anyway, when I went to the meeting, there was an activist, progressive type guy there who is a friend of my wonderful freeloading scam artist tenant. I go up there and I say my piece about what's going on, and very impassionate. What's going on here? This guy's sleeping. Wow, he was sleeping. And then this activist dude comes up after me, and on a slick, he's talking about me without being man enough to call my name or be specific, but it was very clear. He was over. Like the level of detail that was matching me was just excessive. You know what I mean? He's like a guy that came from this city. He mentions the city where I came from, right? And then something else about the house and, how I'm set up. I'm like, okay, I know you're talking about me, fool. So anyway, let me give you the irony. I got a guy in my house who is literally pushing up the rents and taking away inventory from the area, further making the housing crisis worse. So this guy, who if I talk to him, this activist guy, he would be like, I'm fighting for the housing, we need housing, right? Let him tell it. He's trying to help the housing situation. Meanwhile, he's there advocating and, first of all, affiliating himself with a criminal, fraud, liar. This guy's wreaking havoc. This guy had water leaking into a child's bedroom. That's the kind of just like scumball this guy is. And that's who this activist is. Like, come on, man. This guy's literally pushing rents up. Right? How is he doing that? The only reason that I was able to get this house is because of this guy. Right? The previous owner loved the house. He wanted to keep it. But this guy ran the owner out of his own house. How does that push up the rents? Well, the house went up over $100,000. Right? Went up over $100,000. And the guy who bought the house before, he's a big landlord, has multiple properties. I'm sure he's got a lot more money than I do. So that means he probably put a good amount of money down. He didn't do a special loan like me, low down payment. When you do that, your mortgage is low, and therefore you don't need as much rent to be profitable, right? So the rents were pretty low, even though that guy wasn't paying the rent. They were pretty low, but it made more sense for him because he had more money. So there were apartments that people could stay in, right? That had pretty reasonable rents, especially this is the best part of the neighborhood, great place to live in, right? Everybody wants to live there. And because of who bought it and when they bought it, based on the price of real estate at that time, he was able to have pretty low rents, right? But because of one guy who doesn't want to pay rent, makes himself a nuisance, runs out multiple homeowners. Like, who's the common denominator? I'm the fourth owner, I think, in 6 years. Right? Who's the common denominator? This guy, running people out. Every time he runs somebody out of that home because of the rental, real estate just has been going up and up and up. Every time he runs somebody out, he pushes up the rent because the next guy who buys the house has a bigger mortgage, right? And therefore needs more rent for it to be profitable. Because what's the point of, it's a business, right? If you're buying a property to rent out an apartment, it's a business. You have money in the bank that's earning a certain amount of interest, so it's only going in one direction unless you touch it, right? What's the point of taking that money out of the bank and putting it into a property so that your money can go down? Like, that makes no sense. Why would you do that? right? So the more the price of the house goes up, the more pressure for the rents to be higher. And furthermore, because of this guy being in the house and not paying rent, it makes it difficult to find, let's just say, high quality buyers, which I really wouldn't be. I barely had enough money to pull it off, right? So I'm the guy who I have the right combination of high enough income to afford the, the mortgage at all, and with the help of a government program was able to slide through. But because of, again, these multiple sales which keep pushing the price up drastically, so the house it was sold to me for much more than it was sold the original time since this guy's been living there, right? And again, these multiple sales are a result of this guy, right? So he's pushed up the price of the house, therefore pushed up the price of the rent, right? And also, because of him, right, it's hard to find tenants. Nobody wants to live in a building where one guy has garbage bags all over his, well, I shouldn't say nobody. You're on the nice part of town, paying a premium to be on a nice part of town where crime is low and it's beautiful and everybody's cool. It's sort of an ideal neighborhood. You're paying a premium for that. You don't want to be living in the building where there's trash bags on the windows. Trash on the deck, trash everywhere, right? So it's hard for me to convince the people who can afford to live on this particular area. It's hard for me to get people to get in there. Meanwhile, I get this crazy mortgage, I get this guy that's not paying rent. The mortgage has to be paid. So how does he further make the housing crisis worse? And this is who the activist is supporting. I'm his friend. I am good for housing. Not his friend, right? I'm the guy who wants to be the good landlord, right? Take care of my tenants, create an environment that everyone wants to live there, because that's just my character, but also it makes business sense, right? You recruit good tenants and you keep them. You want to have good retention, right? Every time I have to go find a tenant, that's a risk. I don't know who I'm going to get. And then it's time that the apartment's empty and there's a cost you have to pay. It's not good. Ideally, I want stability. So I want good tenants to be there for a while. But that's hard to get with this guy living there. So the mortgage is not waiting for me to figure things out. The mortgage has to be paid. So what do I turn to? Airbnb. Airbnb is a garbage company. You get no support. They treat you like dirt. They allow the guests to abuse you and take advantage of you, right? One lady gave me 1 star because the sheets were too thin and the pillows were too thin. Everybody else is happy. 5 stars, had a great time. But her, she's so unhappy, she gave me a 1 star. Everything else was good. I was very responsive, very helpful to her, suggesting for a restaurant, above and beyond. I get a 1 star. They allow this. I bust my ass with Airbnb. 12 a.m. check-ins, right? And always the risk. You never know who you're going to get. There's all these people in and out of the house. I got a good tenant that's in the building. He's very sensitive to noise. So it's always insane. Everybody that makes an inquiry, I got to let them know, hey, man, you got to be quiet, I've lost money, good amount of money because of that. Because of me being honest and transparent and saying, listen, guys, this is a special situation. It's an older home. You have to be quiet, right? So it's a pain in the ass. It's a lot of work. I have cleaned more toilets, made more beds, mopped more floors than I probably have in my life, right? Because when you're underwater, because you got a guy who is living rent-free and damaging the property and making it harder for you to get tenants and retain tenants. You get a good tenant, then there's mice on their stove.
Use the left lane to turn left.
So you lose
then
that
turn
tenant.
left on Avenue at Port Imperial.
That situation, right, puts you in a very, very precarious situation, right? So the idea of me just hiring somebody to clean, no, that's like $100. So I do it. I do a lot, not always, but I do a lot of the cleaning myself, right? Because I need to maximize profit, because I have this chain around my neck, which is that mortgage that has to be paid. It's got to be paid cash. You can't put it on a credit card. I actually have to have real, actual money, right? Real cash, right? To actually pay the mortgage. So I'm in this situation, a desperate situation of I've got to monetize to the max whatever I can monetize. I can't afford to live in my own house. I can't afford to wait to find a good tenant, right? I need money now. Otherwise, I lose my home, my 30-year investment, 30
Turn
years
left
of
on
saving up
Avenue
money,
at Fort Imperial.
right? While this guy was sponging off of other people, I was doing
You've
16
arrived at
hour
your
days.
destination.
I don't have a family. I don't have any kids, right? Because I chose to grind and grind and grind, all so that I can finally get my house and have this guy destroying it, smashing windows, kicking my door, tearing down my signs, making noise, harassing other tenants, harassing other neighbors, just being an absolute nuisance, right? So this guy literally pushing rents up by sparking so many sales of this house, making it such a risky investment that only someone like me could come in and seal that deal, which pushes it up even more because of my low down payment mortgage, right? What is this guy doing? He's also taking away inventory because he demonstrates how risky the rental market is there, how you don't have any support from local government. So therefore, you have to have a very high standard of your tenants. High credit score, income, whatever. You can't afford to go anywhere near anything like the guy that I have. So you'll see people that seem good and you want to give them a chance, but the stakes are too high. Extremely hostile rental environment. And with no support, it would be reckless for me to be anything else. Well, I'm super selective about my next tenant. Can you imagine if I get another tenant and then they're doing the same thing that he's doing at this point when my money's almost done, my credit is like maxed out? That would be devastating. So that makes it, you know, harder for me to find a tenant because I have to have a really high standard, which means it needs to be empty longer, which means that's pushing me more again to the Airbnb. And what does this activist guy do other than just make this vague, ambiguous statement about, oh, people coming from some other state and doing stuff and complaining about rent when they don't do stuff and blah, blah, blah. Right? And it's like, what are you asking a question? Like, what? I don't know what the point of that was. But the next thing that he goes after is, he mentions in it, oh, and running Airbnbs, and then he starts talking about like basically the rhetoric of like banning Airbnbs. So your friend is starving me, pushing me basically homeless, right? Which I basically am right now. I don't have a toilet. I don't have any running water, right? I'm using a bucket and pellets. That's what I'm doing. That's where I'm at right now. One thing keeping me afloat is Airbnb, and that's what he's focused on. So his friend literally pushed up the rent, literally took away apartments that people could have been living in because of the situation that he caused. And then he wants to also talk about the one thing that's keeping me afloat. Savages. And the other issue is every other landlord or homeowner that, first of all, we speak, of course, we talk. Obviously. They all know, all the locals, they all know what's happening to me. And we know about others that have similar situations going on. That is further making the housing crisis worse because there's already a growing list of homeowners that I know that are taking their units off the market, right? I know one family had a 3-family house. They converted it to a single family. They have no interest in dealing with the nonsense. So that is 2 apartments that we lose right there. I know another homeowner down the block had a tenant, didn't have any issues with a tenant, but because of this is collateral damage, because of them hearing about what's going on, they decided to pull basically, they didn't renew the lease. So now that guy is sitting in a house that has space for people to live. That's his house though, of course, and he's choosing not to rent. He's not doing Airbnb. He's not doing anything. He's not even interested in the money. This is a retired guy. He don't need the money, right? So this guy is leading to multiple apartments being taken off the market. The ones that are on the market are going to get harder and harder to get because homeowners are terrified. First of all, you're not going to want to rent in this kind of environment unless you make a lot of money, because you need to make a lot of money, because you need to account for 6 months to a year or more with no rent. One random tenant decides to stop paying, you might have to be able to survive for a long time without the rent coming in, plus paying legal fees, maintenance, all the stuff that goes on. They might be damaging your property, smashing windows, and you got to just pay, right? Who's going to want to get involved in that business? Except for slumlords with 100 units that have the money, or corporate landlords, right? Or anybody else that's doing it, that's not those two categories. Somebody that's going to be real cautious. It's going to be real hard to rent from them. You got to have 800 credit score. You got to be making $1 million a year. This is destroying the housing situation. And who's right there in the middle pushing it over the edge? Progressive activists. So misguided, listening to bullshitters online, billionaires online, telling them what they should do and this and that and blah, 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 and these evil landlords. Don't know what they're talking about. Living in their basement, making tons of money, isolated from the stuff they talk about. Right? We live in it. They talking about it.